Hello, ladies. Thank you for inviting me to speak at your event. I'm sorry I couldn't be there live and in person, but I'm glad I was able to record this for you. I'm actually a few miles down the road. I'm down in Nashville, speaking at a homeschooling conference right there, right now. But thank you for allowing me to show this to you. I'm going to be taking a 2-hour talk and trying to give it to you in about 15 minutes. So I apologize if I skip things or talk fast or refer you to my book. But why don't we go ahead and get started? The first thing I wanted to remind you of is I am the author of Dressing with Dignity. Yes, you still can get it from Tan Books. You can also get it for a penny plus shipping and handling on Amazon. So make sure you get a copy of that somehow, and I think they have copies for you here today. But what I wanted to start with, which a quote by Pope Pius XII, has always fascinated to me. The trend of fashions is not in itself evil. It flows spontaneously from the social nature of man, in accordance with an impulse which inclines him to keep in harmony with his fellow men and with the way of acting of those amongst whom he lives. He continues, God does not ask you to live outside your times, so careless of fashion as to render yourselves ridiculous by dressing in a way opposed to the common tastes and practices of your contemporaries. In following fashion, virtue lies in the middle course. What God asks of you is to remember always that fashion is not and cannot be the ultimate rule of conduct for you, that beyond fashion and its demands, there are higher and more pressing laws. Principles superior to fashion and unchangeable, which under no circumstances can be sacrificed to the whim of pleasure or fancy, and before which must bow the fleeting omnipotence of the idol of fashion. Pope Pius XII. Something I want to pick out of there right off the bat. Principles superior to fashion and unchangeable. Now, some people are apt to say that there are no such things as guidelines. But this right here indicates that there is something, and it's unchangeable. And I go into detail in the book, but it was released in 1929. Necklines no lower than roughly 2 finger breadths below the pit of the throat, knees covered when seated, upper arms covered, nothing tight, nothing clingy, nothing sheer. And these are the guidelines the Vatican still uses. So if you go to St. Peter's today, this is the sign that you will see outside the basilica. And it's very clear at the top and at the bottom what you're allowed to wear and what you're not. Well, where did this all start from? I'd like to go back and do the history of fashion very briefly and think about Genesis. Adam and Eve walking around naked, they sin, now they're stained with original sin, they make aprons for themselves. But continue to read through Genesis 3:21. The Lord God made tunics for them and clothed them, and then he sent them out of the Garden of Eden. Tunics. Now, think about that. In any language, everybody knows what a tunic is. I have details on this in the book, but tunics. So remember that. Now, also, take a look at what was going on in Greco-Roman times. And I'll just show you just 2 brief pictures of how women dressed. And you're going to see a common theme, and we're going to fly through these pictures just as quickly as possible. But this is a common theme. Long dresses, long sleeves, a defined waistline, and something on the hair. So we're not just talking Christian culture. We're not talking Jewish culture. We're talking culture, period. That this is how women have dressed. Now let's take a look. These are just portraits that you can find, paintings of how women are dressed. Do you see the same type of theme? Long dresses, long sleeves, something on the head. And I want you to notice too, in this left-hand picture, I can see it on my screen. You might not be able to see it. She's wearing what's called a modesty scarf. That's what they called them. She has a scarf that she's tied around her neck and in her décolletage area to fill the area, because they didn't have zippers, they didn't have Velcro, so they would pull a dress on, tie it up, and then they would fill in their neckline with a modesty scarf. And here's a better picture of it you can see in these 2 pictures. Also, something that you'll notice that I cover briefly in the book is that the masculine influence came into fashions around the time of the French Revolution. That's also the time when you think about Pride and Prejudice. These are the types of clothing that women actually were wearing. These are actually imprints out of a fashion magazine of the time period. This is another reason we don't want to turn to Hollywood for our ideas of what women were wearing, because this is what Hollywood says that women were wearing during that time. Don't follow Hollywood for anything, let alone fashion. These are actual photographs out of the fashion magazines. Necklines are filled, arms are covered, but you'll also notice that the hemline goes all the way down. You'll also notice that the waistline has been elevated to an empire waist. It was part of the masculine touches and finishes in clothing. But clothing changed right away back to what it always has been, with a waistline. On the left-hand side picture, I want you to notice something else. The mother is seated, then the child is standing there. That's a little boy, by the way. I won't get into how the Victorian era they dressed boys in dresses, but I have 2 boys and I can understand how it slows them down. The woman in the back to the right, in the left-hand picture, noticed her outfit is tighter, her neckline is lower, and her skirt is lower. That is because she's a servant. And in different cultures and in different times, they either say that servants or slaves don't have a soul or aren't real people, so they dress them in less clothing, or they dress them in tighter clothing. Very interesting when you see what's going on in the world today. In the right-hand picture, what I want to point out is that little girl fashion and mother fashions are the same. There was no such thing as teens wore one thing and adults wore something else. The concept was you were raising your young daughter to be a woman. And so she started dressing like a woman and acting like a woman because we were raising her to be a woman. So that's what's interesting about these 2 pictures. I could spend more time on them, but I won't. This is what I want to point out about silliness in fashion. First of all, notice the beautiful, beautiful materials and the beautiful embroidery. Also notice the bustle. This was a silly fashion fad that women followed. So they wanted their back of their dress to look large, where now people are saying, does this make me look fat? They really wanted to look that way. So this is where you can see some of the silliness in fashion. Now, another question I get quite often is, what about sports? Because I do just about everything in a dress. And I do feel that there are a couple occasions that I wouldn't want to, for example, climb on the roof on a ladder wearing a dress. And if that was the case, I would ask my husband to do it, frankly. But there are cases where, women come to me and ask me about sports. Let me show you this. Women used to do sports in dresses all the time. Now, am I recommending you hop on a bike or go play tennis? No. But I just want to point out that, for example, that dress on the left, the picture on the left, those dresses are mountain hiking dresses. See, they're in the mountains and, so they did everything in a dress. And so I kind of think we're kind of wimping out sometimes when we say, oh, I just can't do it because I can't do it in a dress. Have you tried? Have you tried? The picture on the right is another 2 ladies, and look at those sleeves. Another example of silly fashion fads, but beautiful. Long dress, long sleeve, defined waistline, and something on the head. I was going to show pictures of our Blessed Mother too, but, I think you can get the idea here that I'm going to fly through these pictures rather quickly as well, because just beautiful materials, lovely feminine fabrics. Just ladies wanted to look nice. We get into the Titanic era, the Edwardian years. Again, we're still seeing long dresses. I want to point out something important. Pope Leo XIII had a vision on October 13th of 1884. He heard Satan say, I could destroy your church if I had the time and more power over those who give themselves over to my service. And Pope Leo heard Christ answer, you have the power, you have the time. I give you 100 years. That was in 1884, October 13th of 1884. What happened on October 13th of 1917? Of course, all the visions leading up to that point, Our Lady of Fatima. There was a couple of interesting things that Our Lady of Fatima said to Jacinta. More souls will go to hell for sins of the flesh than for any other reason. And she also said, certain fashions will be introduced which will offend our divine Lord very much. 1917. I was just before the flapper era. So what was she talking about? Let's take a look. These are the fashions that hit. It quickly turned around. Maybe the flapper era was 10 years or so. But you know what? It never recovered. Shorter sleeves, shorter hemlines. The time went on and we got through the 40s and the 50s. We did have basically the same thing. Arms covered, knees covered, a defined waistline, and something on the head. Now, it was also this time in 1930 that many women were coming to their pastors saying, wait a minute, things have changed so rapidly. My daughter is dressing like a flapper. What do I do? And their priests were being told by Rome to, if people came up to the altar rail to receive Holy Communion, that if they were dressed immodestly, then they were to be turned away. Well, there was a lot of question about what does it mean to be immodest, and that is when the guidelines were established. So as we get into the 60s, you can see that things were still the same. Even Jackie Kennedy would not be seen without her little hat on. Women wore gloves when they left the house. But notice again, the necklines, the sleeves, the waist, the knees are covered. And then the 60s hit, the late 60s, and we had Twiggy, who was so skinny and so thin that people thought she was a boy. We get through the 70s, we get into the 80s with Princess Diana. We also had Madonna. Calvin Klein jeans, designer jeans came out. It was really the first time women were wearing trousers outside of the home or for casual and everyday events, or let alone into business world. And of course, Title IX, that's a girl, by the way, on the left. Title IX brought a whole new sense of what it meant to be a woman. And things got very confusing. But we always have the church to fall back on. And I think the challenge that we're having right now is that people think that they need to be dowdy. But I'm here to tell you, modest does not mean frumpy. Nowhere does the church say they want us to be frumpy. The church just gives us principles that are superior to fashion and unchangeable. Necklines, knees, upper arms, nothing tight, nothing clingy, nothing sheer. So let's go through that quote again. The trend of fashions is not in itself evil. It may be silly with bustles and weird sleeves, but it is not evil. It flows from the social nature of man because we're trying to keep harmony with the people amongst whom we live. Here's the key. God doesn't ask you to live outside your times, so careless of the demands, exigencies, the demands of fashion as to render yourself ridiculous by dressing in a way opposed to the common tastes and practices of your contemporaries. So what does that mean? Well, that goes both ways. We're not going to wear what comes down the runway, these silly, silly fashions, but we don't want to be wearing something, we're going to dress like our Blessed Mother dressed, or I want to dress like Pride and Prejudice, or I'm going to wear Victorian fashions. Things that are going to be so outside of our times are not what the church asks of us. Because you know what? That draws undue attention to ourselves. And it says, look at me, I'm holy because I'm dressing frumpy. That's not what God wants. That's not what the church asks for. The church wants us to be dignified. So remember, in following fashion, virtue lies in the middle course. What God asks of you is to remember fashion is not and cannot be the ultimate rule of conduct, because there's higher laws. Principles superior to fashion and unchangeable, which under no circumstances can be sacrificed. And again, necklines, knees, upper arms, nothing tight, nothing clean, nothing sheer. So the next question is, then what do I wear? Can I do it? How do I not stand out? Because I don't want to follow the fashions, but I don't want to stick out like a sore thumb and look so ridiculous and outside the times. I've got the answer. Here's some pictures from my Pinterest page that my daughters and I have pulled together. Nothing tight, nothing clingy, nothing sheer, no low necklines. The knees are always going to be covered when seated in any of these outfits. All of these fit the guidelines. They're not necessarily following fashions because some of these I picked out 10 years ago. Some of them are current. Some of them are 5 or 6 years old. But all of them fit the guidelines. And that's my goal. And that's my message to you today. You can dress modestly and still not stick out because you don't want to draw undue attention to yourself. That's not true humility. But you also want to follow the church's wisdom and guidelines because more souls go to hell for sins of the flesh than any other sins there are. This is a sixth and ninth commandment issue. And we want, as mothers, we want to dress this way and set the example for our daughters. And when our daughters come to us and say, I don't want to dress frumpy, I don't want to stick out, she can still dress in a dignified manner, not stick out, and be pleasing. If you want more information, I do have some classes that I teach for free online, how to dress modestly for your body type, your state in life, your age. Just contact me, go to my website at colleenhammond.com or send me an email at colleen@colleenhammond.com. I tried to take 2 hours and a 200-page book and squeeze it into 15 minutes, and I almost made it. So I'm sorry if I went a little bit long, but thank you again for allowing me to at least come and be with you through video, and I look forward to hearing from you by email or visiting me on my website. Thank you so much, and God bless you.